Thank you, Dr. Wood, for being here as we host our 4th Academy Counseling in the Era of Equity. I wanted to start off our conversation by just asking you if you could share a little bit more about yourself, kind of your background and your areas of focus as far as research.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here. So in terms of my background, I'm a professor at San Diego State University in the College of Education in our Community College Leadership Doctoral Program. So I focus on better preparing people who are counselors, advisors, deans, vice presidents, people who work in community colleges to be equity-minded leaders in our institutions. In terms of my background, I started working in community colleges as an outreach person, really being a liaison between the institution I was working at and our local prison release. So specializing in going in, working with them, helping support men, oftentimes men of color, in their transition from our prison our criminal injustice system into our institutions.
And you have a vast amount of experience, and like you said, working with the various stakeholders of colleges in particular. Can you share, just in the work that you've engaged them in, what are maybe one or two of the major challenges that you've seen colleges experience as they try and kind of create more equity-minded or grounded structural change in policies, things of that nature? What have you seen as those major challenges in doing that work?
I mean, I think the biggest challenges I see is that there are a lot of initiatives and efforts, but most of the time, even when they're really well-intentioned and in their minds designed to promote and produce equity, they oftentimes don't. So for example, you can have an early alert system, right, where we're going to, at a certain point in the semester, identify students who aren't doing well and then intercede. We can have promise programs. We can have early warning systems that are triaging students when they come in. We can have all these different efforts that are in place, but ultimately, if we aren't building those in a way that are specifically designed to reach students who are from minoritized communities, then oftentimes what we're doing is we're constructing programs to serve the students who are already being served well by our institutions. So, I mean, I would think that that's one of the biggest challenges, because most institutions, they want to talk about large-scale changes, but they have this philosophy that I see of really a rising tide lifts all boats, right? We're going to do something that benefits everyone. And, it's good practice, and so good practice should translate into, in their minds, good results. And I think what we have seen is that in the institutions that we've looked at that have had that approach, they might have an overall increase in success if you look at all groups. But once you start disaggregating that out, it's not uncommon for us to find that over the time frame that they've been doing these equity-based efforts, that they actually have declines for students of color, and in particular men of color, men who are Black, Latino, Southeast Asian, Hmong, Cambodian, Laotian, Vietnamese, Native American, and Pacific Islander.
Thank you. And a couple of things that that makes me think of is, one, it reminds me of kind of how involved and how complex and comprehensive the challenges that we've kind of created within our institutions are. And, is a reminder that we are responding to these types of challenges and also thinking about the success we want to see with our students, but treating or creating solutions that don't address the complexity and how deep-seated the actual challenges are. So that's just, in what you're talking about, that's something that resonates with me, kind of looking at maybe what are some technical things that we can fix here and there, but are we really kind of addressing the reason why we're trying to make changes? And another thing that I'm thinking about is just, we recently hosted a speaker at Skyline College, Dr. Christine Sleater, and when she was doing a presentation, something that she shared really stuck with me, which is that often when we're doing any kind of work, whether related to equity and inclusion or anything of that kind of nature, unfortunately, the thing that determines whether or not it's going to be implemented or change will be made is whether or not people who the program is not designed for are going to benefit from it, right? Mm-hmm. And she, went into why that's dangerous, and thinking about the work that you've done a lot in working with men of color and how they're implicated in the systems. Could you speak a little bit more to how that ineffective approach impacts men of color in particular, whether that be how they experience learning in the classroom, how they see themselves as part of the college or not. What does that look like for men of color, recognizing that there are consistently Black men in particular, most disproportionately impacted groups on all of our colleges. So what does that mean for that experience?
Yeah, I mean, we face that in my own institution and in the work. We see it very commonly where, people have interventions that really need to focus on specific target populations, whether it's men of color or some other population. And the challenge is, like you said, is that they want to see interventions that are going to benefit everybody. But the truth is, what works for everybody isn't necessarily what works for men of color. So part of it is when we kind of take a step back, and I know we're talking about this in terms of the context of counseling, but let's think about this in terms of your average faculty member, right? Your average faculty member has never been trained how to teach, right? So let's say that you're in a community college or university, right? And you're going to be teaching in biology. You get a bachelor's degree in biology. Then you maybe work in industry for a couple of years, you get a master's degree, maybe even a PhD, and then you go straight into the classroom with no training on how to teach. And so what people typically do is that they teach how they were taught. So they think about, okay, what do I saw other people do? And then I try to essentially replicate that. And the challenge is how they are taught is typically not how our students learn, and particularly our students of color. Why? Because the way they have been taught is essentially to convey a curriculum and teaching practice that's racist. So the very practices that they think are good for everyone are really designed to disenfranchise. And in some ways, it's almost marvelous how you can have, and I don't mean that marvelous in a good way, I mean like in really just as marvelous, where you can have one classroom, same social environment, same group of students, you got a white student and a Black student, and they can have totally wildly different experiences in that same environment because it hasn't been designed for them. Well, the counseling office is no different. When a counselor is meeting with a student, if they're employing regular counseling techniques, they could be doing more harm than good. If they're employing multicultural counseling techniques, they're probably going to be reaching those students. And the truth is, a multicultural counseling technique is better for everybody, not just for our students of color.
And thinking about kind of what this means within the context of the work that we're trying to do as the Equity Institute, our role is really to become and be a place of support, a center, a hub for college practitioners and educators to come together and really think thoughtfully about how to do it differently. And so could you just share a little bit about what you've been experiencing so far? I think that most people who attend any kind of professional development experience don't have the honor of seeing the keynote there, hanging out and really kind of being in the space. So what are you thinking so far about the things you have been able to see?
So yeah, I mean, I was glad that I was able to get in last night. I was able to see the curriculum that has been gone over for this institute, and then I've also been able to attend several of the sessions today. And what I like about it is that the conversations aren't this equity, culture, inclusion, social justice on a broad level, but they're really talking about the elephant in the room, which is race. And I think that that's important because oftentimes that's not what really happens in the conversation. But I think that one of the benefits of the fact, and one of the reasons I even want to be involved with this institute is because it's being led by Lasana Hotep, who is a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, a brother of mine, and really even like a mentor of mine, someone who I know really knows this work in a way that can actually be meaningful and impactful. Because unfortunately, 20 years ago, you couldn't make a career on equity, right? Equity was something that wasn't beneficial to go into a room and talk about equity or racial issues. That wasn't something that was prominent. But over the past, 5 years, it's become like a big thing, really, beginning, more than 5 years ago with the equity plans that all the different colleges had to do. And then it's just continued. And now equity is like the thing that everyone wants to talk to, and people want to be front and center, and people want to talk about what they think is their knowledge. And the truth is, most people don't know what they're doing when it comes to this work. They may see like elements and certain principles that align with their own ideology, but most of them are what we call oblivious. They have good intentions. They think they know what they're doing, but the truth is they actually oftentimes can be arming people to do more damage than good. So having someone like Brother Hotep here who understands that, at the root of all of this is really racism. So we can talk about all these other issues. We can talk about culture. We can talk about diversity and inclusion. But if we're not talking about race and racism, then ultimately we're avoiding what we really need to be doing, and we should be ashamed of that.
I 100% agree. I think without Lasana Hotep's vision and real kind of skill and experience in this work, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are. And to be honest with you, it wouldn't even be a conversation. And it's very clear that the way in which we approach developing the programs, how we approach making certain relationships, and essentially how we do everything is really, we're in a place where we can recognize and understand the traditional way that this work has been done, where, like you said, 20 years ago, the conversation wasn't even present, and there's been some change kind of in this field. And so we're talking about equity, but even when we're putting so much energy towards it, so much excitement, funding, initiatives, strategies, if we're really not being kind of anti-racist in our approach, then what we do, and I talk about this and I think about this a lot, is like we truly put in a lot of resources to create a larger problem, right? When our desire was to do the complete opposite. So, you said when you were sharing about the classroom experience that is kind of marvelous, and that's almost the paradox that exists as practitioners, right? Is that we're actually in many ways exacerbating the inequity when we don't know what we're doing. And so we're in a space where we're really trying to do something radically different. And on the note about talking about race, another clear challenge, right? People want to talk about other things that make them feel like maybe they're addressing the problem, but until we get to the very idea or thing that's even created such racist educational outcomes, then we're going to just be doing a lot of doing and not seeing the results that we want to see. And so, as the Equity Institute, we really believe in having an anti-racist and anti-sexist approach if we truly want to see the change in the outcomes that supports the people who have been left behind for so many years.
One thing that goes along with that, right? Because you're making me think, like, this whole effort that's taking place on, like, food and housing insecurities, right? Across the state, across the nation, everybody's focused on this topic, which is an important topic, right? We have some students who don't know where their next meal is going to come from, and they don't know where they're going to sleep. Those are real concerns that we have to be focused on. In our data, we look at acute insecurities, a student who doesn't know where that next meal is going to come from, right? These are students who are really on the edge. And we find that if you look across the state, right, across the state of California in our data, 12 to 13% of students experience an acute food insecurity. But then we start disaggregating that data and then looking at it by race and looking at it by gender identities, we find that Black males, almost a quarter of them are experiencing that as a challenge. But when you create your food pantry and your secondhand clothing closet and your bus pass program and all these different things that are designed to reach those students, do you have the Black male in mind, or you just have this as a general strategy? Because I think about, we all know that with affirmative action and that, one of the biggest groups that benefited from affirmative action wasn't people of color, it was white women, right? Do we end up doing the same thing? I wonder how many institutions are actually looking at their data and saying, oh, who are we actually serving with these important programs, right? And they're important, but are they reaching the people that they need to reach? And unless you have an anti-racist perspective on the work, you're ultimately just avoiding the problem. And when you said that, that's the first thing that came to my mind. And it's not that other students aren't deserving. We want every student to who needs the resources to get it. But if that's not what's happening, then again, you're setting a false promise and doing more damage than good.
Absolutely. And I think about, talking about race, it's like, what is it that makes it so challenging in particular to talk about race for folks? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the sentiment that my work is a fill in the blank, it's a doing, it's a function, it's a particular area, it's a department, that's what the work is part of what prevents us from really being able to get to the place we need to as far as interrogating the more uncomfortable topics like race, right? So like I said, we emphasize doing the work in a way that is anti-racist, because I think part of what that does too is that, I mean, it allows ourselves to be real about what the issues are. I have moments where I feel like, whether I'm in a one-on-one conversation or in a group setting, when it seems like the conversations are a little bit more shallow or not really interrogating the problem, something that I just say, I'm like, we are in a space where we produce racist educational outcomes, right? So let's have the conversations about everything we need to, our ideas, our initiatives supporting all students, but this is the particular reality we're working in. And so we can talk about all these things, but unless we address this particular fact, then it's really hard to close any equity gaps, and we see the gaps are by race. Mm-hmm. So how do we move forward with that? But, you know, something else that I was thinking about is, you know, having the conversation about race, again, it puts you in a place where you have to really interrogate your practice and your consciousness. And what has been the norm in PD is that you go and you learn about something that's kind of like a technical piece, right? We have a joke about people wanting equity in a can, but we're not talking about equity in a can. We're talking about a really long, intentional process of deep, critical self-reflection. And so that is the reason why our approach with the Academy is that we have folks come as teams. We have our activities, our discussion questions, everything happening to really get them to a place where they can critically reflect, understand what they've been doing, and do something differently. So could you speak a little bit to, you know, your thoughts on our approach as far as bringing together a team of colleagues from campuses that are not just counseling faculty members, but it's their deans of counseling, their support staff, in some cases their vice president of student services, their VPI. What is your thought about bringing those folks together and having them engage in this kind of way?
Well, I think it's important to do that because ultimately one person can't address a problem. In our data, for example, we look at validation, and a student who receives a positive validating message from one person, it doesn't have an effect on other non-cognitive outcomes such as their confidence in their academic abilities, the perceptions of the usefulness of college, their intrinsic interest in what they're learning. It doesn't really have an effect. It really takes, you know, a team of people, 4, 5 people, for us to then see the manifold benefits of that validation. So ultimately, we have to have teams because we have to be able to send people to other people who we know will care about them. And I'm going to be talking about this later today, the notion of essentially an underground railroad. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, I can't say to any student, hey, just go to financial aid, sure, right? I can't say go to the career center or go to counseling or tutoring, because ultimately they might go there and have a negative experience because they might engage with somebody who doesn't care, right? And even like the whole notion of like people say, well, let's go and I'll walk them over and I'll introduce them to somebody. Right, and talk about the importance of having a warm handoff, right? But you can't have a warm handoff to a cold person, right? So ultimately, it's about identifying who is on the team, who wants to be part of that railroad, and then creating an underground network of support for students while we continue to try to work and create an institution that's committed to equity and diversity. And unfortunately, that's a long-term effort. Right. So in the meantime, we can't just do it on our own. We have to have that team-based approach. And that's why I think it's important, because otherwise we're going to have people who can be supported in pockets, in isolated areas, but never across the different resources and services that they need. Absolutely.
And I think with just those things that you were speaking to, I think will come alive even more for participants if it hasn't already in this last session they're in, where they're really focusing on what does it mean to do transformative counseling in the structure of guided pathways. And a challenge in the guided pathways conversations is because it's such a major change that we're implementing, and it opens up a lot of different conversations, complicated things, planning, strategizing. A lot of the energy goes towards that, but rarely do we ever think about you know, what is the kind of development, support, training, what is the literature I should be immersed in, who are the people I should be talking to, what are the daily kind of exercises or ways that I can set myself up so I can be successful to do the work in the guided pathways, not just we're in guided pathways now and I'm going to my same place, being my same self with my same consciousness. and thinking about just what this work and this experience means for people being here, and just wanted to share with you just some of the ways that people are taking this information. But some concrete things folks are doing is taking something that the Equity Institute developed, which is that T3 framework, right? Mm-hmm. Looking at what is the traditional way efforts have been made as far as without the kind of equity lens, just what is the traditional that yields the outcomes that we see? What are some ways that people have tried to be more forward thinking? And I think about the warm handoff too, which is wonderful sentiment, but ultimately, if the student is cold and they didn't have the skill to get the student to be a little bit more engaged, in the warm handoff is not successful, right? And then finally looking at what does it mean to be transformative in our practice, where we recognize kind of the inequities that are the inequities that exist within our system, and then how to kind of move through it. And that requires the nuance, right? And I love that concept of the Underground Railroad, because I feel like that's our conversations. We know what's already happening. We already know what we have to be compliant with. We already know kind of policy-wise what we can and can't do. We know those things, but we need to figure out what is this other space that we're trying to create where we have the shared understanding that we're going to approach it differently. And the way you describe that, I feel like very much speaks to what we're trying to do. And as far as what colleges have done, just a couple of things that we've seen is that even when people are approaching their professional development experiences where they're comprehensive, in some cases they're mandated, right? They're taking either a whole section of or either an activity or a whole guidebook and saying this is the literature and the curriculum we're going to follow. And even at our college, just looking at their standing committee meetings for anything, they want to use that T3 framework. So can you speak a little bit to, what are your thoughts about using something like T3 as a simple tool to engage these conversations where we're really talking about what we need to be talking about?
I think it's a great framework, and one of the reasons I do is that it allows you to see kind of where we started, where we're at presently, but ultimately where we need to go. The challenge is that, like you said, most of the people are still kind of in that middle, right? They're maybe starting to reject some of those older frameworks, but the way that they're doing it isn't fully informed, and because they're doing it in a way where they haven't truly embraced the principles of racial equity. So for us to be able to move forward, we have to be able to change mindsets. And the challenge is it's hard to do that when people don't want to change. I think about what you said earlier about like people want like the canned ideas, right? The list. When I first started doing work on men of color, oftentimes we would talk to counselors, advisors, faculty, and they'd be like, "Can you give us like a list of bullets of like different things that we should be doing with them?" And I remember one time my colleague Frank Harris, who I do all this work with, one of my close friends, like we started working on a list. Like, okay, well, let's create a list for them. And then we got like halfway through it, and we're like, why are we doing this? Because ultimately, that we can't just give you a list on what to do unless you've changed your mindset. And it wasn't until several years ago that I had a student who explained an incident to me that he experienced that made me truly understand why that's so important and why ultimately having a T3 framework itself is so important. So this a faculty member, well-meaning, well-intentioned, good person, good heart, but maybe doesn't know their ideologies, maybe doesn't know all the right practices, basically goes to this flex day. And this is a true story. He goes in, he participates in a session where he was learning about college men and masculinities. My colleague Frank Harris was doing it. Really interesting session. And they learned that some men have challenges asking for help because they've been socialized to see help seeking as a sign of weakness. Right. So then after that session, then this faculty member goes to another session where they learned about the importance of building relationships with students outside the classroom. So he's like, okay, I'm going to do that. That's important. Yeah. So charged up, excited, wanting to, change the world. Yeah. He goes out of his flex day. He's like, the first person who I see, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to engage them, right? Super excited. And, he walks out, and the first person he happens to see is a black male. He's like, oh, there's one. Right. And so he walks over to him. He says, hi, I'm so-and-so, I teach here. I hear you guys have problems asking for help. So what I'd like to do is to build a relationship with you. So what sport do you play? right? And ultimately, the challenge is like, I could give that guy a list, go build relationships, know the importance of these issues about help seeking. Here's some things you should be talking about with students. But ultimately, if my mindset is informed by stereotypes that are racist stereotypes about what students can and should be in terms of as athletes, and really about negative perceptions of certain groups, then that's what I'm going to produce. So it doesn't matter if you change the external, unless you're changing the internal, then ultimately people are going to bear bad fruit. And so what we're just trying to do, and I know what you all are trying to do, is to get people to that next level. And getting them to that next level really means that we have to go back to the foundation. We can't be up here talking about strategies and practices. We can't be here talking about relationship building if we haven't gotten here and started talking about perceptions and how we view one another and how we think about our students. Because if we don't want to talk about this in here, then ultimately everything up here is basically going to be destroyed.
And the thing is, the belief dictates the behavior, right? And so it's funny because we talk about in the traditional how when it comes to the technical mechanic things, hey, I know how to type out a syllabus. Hey, I know how to run down the rules on the first day. Hey, I know how to call and say, I can do that, right? But when we're at the place where it really is about your belief, and we're seeing that you know how to do kind of the mechanical, the technical things, they don't know how to do that without the change consciousness. And that's the piece that's challenging, right? The whole sentiment around give me the list of things I need to do, the equity in the can, it speaks to this whole phenomenon, but it's still a technical thing. I just need to do something a little bit differently and just show care more. And so, I think just with the work that you're all doing too, it's informed kind of what we're doing, really thinking about an educator kind of archetype. How have you been trained and socialized into your work, and how can you identify, how are those practices manifested in your work? And so that's another space where we were inspired by the work you're doing as far as organizationally, who are the different stakeholders and what are the roles that they play. And, I just feel very fortunate that we can have you really close out this experience. And if there's wanted to offer a moment, if there's anything you want to share that you felt like wasn't covered in our discussion, give you an opportunity to share that.
I think the only last thing I want to share is this. One of the challenges around this perception conversation is that some people can be good and know a lot and do well with certain populations. Like, for example, you might have someone who does well and really knows what it takes to support students with food insecurities. Or you might have somebody who really knows how to serve students with varying abilities. Or someone who may be really good with the Latinx community. But the truth is, just because you're good with that doesn't mean you're good in other areas. And sometimes because we put this broad umbrella of equity and diversity, that it makes us feel like we are stronger than we really are when we all have work to do. Anybody who thinks that they've arrived and that they've made it and that they know what to do, how to serve all these different groups, the minute you have that mindset is the minute that you're probably part of the problem.
And I think today and how we wrap up, what we're going to see just based on the level of engagement we've seen from folks is that this is going to really be a jumping point, a starting point for people to go about it a different way. And I just want to say thank you again for helping enrich the experience.
And thank you for the work you're doing too.
Thank you.
It's amazing.